Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Blair. This one is very self-explanatory. It's Matt Karpe, who is the author of New Metal, A Definitive Guide, and various other curious tomes on the topic of new metal, and Temple of Blair alumni Joel McIver, who is the author of various books on heavy metal and rock and roll and whatnot. But in 2002, he came out with a book called New Metal, The Next Generation of Rock and Punk. So it's a good mishmash of perspectives of the time, what with Joel having written this 20 years ago, and Matt having written his piece just a few years ago. Anyway, let's jump straight into it. 1, 2, fuck shit up. An opening pitch, lads. Thanks very much for making the time. As you guys all know, my focus journalistically and from an academic standpoint is on a very specific part of the music history with the Roadrunner stuff. And it kind of occurred to me that new metal as a genre, as a movement, as a period, I kind of missed it, because in this period I was a Maiden kid. I was just listening to Iron Maiden and things like that, and I didn't really get into Slipknot till volume 3. So I'm just kind of I've completely missed the boat. So when I became aware that there's only two kind of published authors in the space, it felt like this is an opportunity for an education. So in true Bob Nalbandian style, rest in peace, I just thought I'd throw you two together and we could just have a bit of a retrospective on it, if that sounds cool to you.
It is, yeah. There is actually another published book on new metal by a guy called Tommy Udo, who died a couple of years ago.
Really?
Yeah, it came out about the same time as mine. And he was a real sweetheart, but we can get into that. He was old school journalist from the previous generation to me. He died in his 50s, but there was another book.
Right. Well, let's start there then, Joel. So this is 2001. This is pre Glenn Hughes and Metallica and things like that. So where are you?
Another era. I mean, it's 22
yeah.
years ago. I'm 52 now, and I was 30 then. I had babies, and now I've got adults running around. You know what I mean? It's a completely different life stage. Well, I'll be brief because I could talk all day about this and bore you, but
Yeah.
I came to new metal in a really strange way, right? Because I was already sort of 29, 30 when that stuff was peaking. So I was the editor. I was the production editor on a magazine called Record Collector. Right? You probably know it. Super cool vinyl mag. I was on the staff for a few years. And on that mag, I was kind of the metal guy, right? So not the only one, but one or two, writing about stuff that I liked, which was like you. It was Maiden, and it was Motorhead and Slayer and Metallica, right? They were my big things. But we kept getting sent these albums for review and offered interviews with artists like Slipknot, and no one else really knew what the hell was going on. Oh, was it? It's just metal. Is it like Maiden? It must be like Motorhead, because everyone else who wasn't into metal didn't have that frame of reference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I'll do it. And so I started writing about this stuff, right? I remember writing a massive Slipknot piece, interviewed Joey, did a big old Limp Bizkit article. I wrote about Korn, I wrote about Cold Chamber, and all the way on down, right, for that magazine, and then freelanced a bit of stuff out to Metal Hammer and stuff. And then so suddenly, at the age of 30, I was the new metal guy, right? But I hadn't really been listening to Korn in 1994, for example, right? So I only really got to it in about 99, 2000, 2001 when it was peaking. So I can't say that I was a 16-year-old and Limp Bizkit meant everything to me, or Slipknot were huge when I was 14 or something. Which you could say, for example, about my son, right, who went through a major Slipknot phase in his mid-teens and grew out of it, So what I'm trying to say, the short answer to your question is that my route into new metal was a little bit unusual, I suppose, because it was a kind of a professional thing, and I was already way past the young years when that stuff means a lot to you, which I imagine is a bit different to your story, Matt.
Yeah. Well, you said obviously 16 and Limp Bizkit meaning everything. I was 14 and Limp Bizkit did mean everything.
Yeah.
I literally grew up in, that was the first heavy music I encountered was, I think it was 2000. Yeah, I had a friend, he lent me the first Slipknot album and Korn's Follow the Leader. And basically I was all the way through school that day, I was trying to work out which album I'm going to listen to first. And I think the Nine-Headed Monster of Slipknot was a little bit too scary for someone who, up until that point, had probably listened to Manic Street Preachers and Guns N' Roses. That was about as rocky as I got. So I went with Korn. From within the first 30 seconds of the first track there, I was hooked on them, just the groove and obviously the completely different sound that I'd ever heard before. So yes, they were, obviously then I did listen to Slipknot after that. And being in the UK, I mean, I didn't have a computer at the time, so I had to rely on the Kerrang magazine to come out weekly, which at the time, of course, was all on nu metal. So yes, I was a nu metal kid from my very younger years.
So just going back to Joel, what was the call to action to write the tome, nu metal, the next generation of rock and punk? Was that a professional engagement or just a curiosity?
Let me think. That was my either my second or my third book, right? So I had done a book in 2000 called Extreme Metal, which was my first book. So that was all the really grisly death metal and black metal and thrash metal stuff that I was into. And that book did well. And then the publishers said, well, what else you got? You know what I mean? And so the next book was a book about Slipknot. So, you know, Slipknot had barely got started really when I wrote that book in 2001. They had a couple of albums out, didn't they? And they literally had 2 albums out and the demo one. So I did that, and then the same publisher said, well, come on, let's keep rolling. These books are doing well. And that was my aim, you know what I mean? I wanted to be an author. I was a journalist full time, but my goal was to be a sort of independent author and work in an office like this, as I have actually done for the last 18 years. So that was it. I said, well, let's do a book on nu metal then. It's the same format as Extreme Metal, A to Z. Let's get all the bands in. It'll be a bit of a laugh. It'll look like a graphic novel. And that's how that came about. Yeah, it was a professional engagement.
It is good. It kind of reminds me of like the DK encyclopedias you had when you were a kid, except without like the cross-section pictures of like a ship or something like that.
With exploded stuff. Yeah, see, I don't think it is a very good book. That's kind of you to say that, but it's not terrible. But it was at the very start of my career, right? And I was fairly new as a writer. And I think I felt I needed to make jokes because I was a bit embarrassed about liking some of the bands, which is tragic. You know, you should always just own what you like and own what you are. But of course, I was younger and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So some of it is a bit crap, actually, but none of it is terrible. I don't look back on it and cringe like some people do. You know,
I think it's, for me, for someone who was like, I wasn't really there for it. I understand there's like that you've only got like a hot and cold sensor where you're like, oh, Limp Bizkit, there's some controversy. Linkin Park, fairly clean. Korn, there's something else going on there. There's a different kind of angst there. But this is quite, this puts it into words. It kind of vocalizes what was going on, but also at the same time, it was in the middle of it. And you were quite, there's some passages which are like, oh yeah, Joel knows this is a fated thing. And it's quite clear that there's cycles and, you know, all these things. Yeah, it
was doomed, really, wasn't it? The book, I think that book came out in 2003, and that was nu metal was pretty much, was it 02? Didn't have long left, did it? You know, and we'll get into whether it's come back in any meaningful way, but that first wave was kind of on its way out, wasn't it?
Yeah. So similarly, in kind, nu metal, a definitive guide, Matt. So what was the call to action? Because your bibliography, it does focus around this sort of part of the world, doesn't it? For the most part, I know you got some fiction in there as well, haven't you?
At the start, I was, I've wanted to be a writer for many years, and I think I did a little crappy, like Joel said, sometimes your earlier books you look back on them and think, so I had done a self-published book, and when it came to nu metal, I belatedly came in possession of Joel's book, probably around 2015, I imagine.
Bloody hell.
Something like that, yeah. So obviously reading through it, and 2002 it came out. I was reading through some of the biographies, and obviously there's bands there where had perhaps only released one album at the time, and Joel, sort of tipped some of them for going on for greatness. Some unforeseen split up after that, and perhaps never was to be seen again. So by sort of 2015, 16. Obviously, I'd lived through most of that nu metal era, and I could feel like there was some bands that were kind of coming back, or that the whole movement was coming back in a sense. There's still a dedicated fan base, like a cult following almost, for nu metal. Again, at the time, self-published, I decided to do a book encapsulating the whole movement from the beginning up until the then present day. A lot of new bands coming through with sort of the same nu metal aesthetics in their sounds. So I did a couple of versions of that myself, and then I was fortunate enough to get a publisher on board in 2020, I think it was now, Sonic Bond. I approached them and I said, I'm considering doing a final, like a trilogy of books, I guess, a final version. Would it be something you'd be interested in taking on? At the time, they only had a couple of their own dedicated series, and they did suggest that perhaps 2 or 3 times a year they may take on a book so completely different to what they've done before. And luckily, yes, they took on this one, which became a definitive guide. For the first couple of books, I was able to get interviews with members of some of the bands from back in the day, and I was able to go back and get a few more, speak to some of the guys I spoke to before for like an updated chat for the content. And yeah, that's how it came to be. Obviously, there's a lot more text than there is images in there. There's a nice picture section in the middle of the book. That's just the publisher's format. I do like the idea of a book where you've got images sort of throughout, obviously certain bands and whatnot. But yeah, that's how it came out. And yeah, it was nice to see it come together, and obviously a lot more professional looking than what I was able to do self-publishing wise.
Do you feel in it? Because essentially, sorry to butt in, we both did books that are like a generation apart about the same subject.
Yeah.
You know, literally, what is that, 18, 17 years between them, I guess. And I haven't read your book, but I want to, because I want to know how your perspective differs from mine, you know, being stuck in the middle of it and then being so long past the first wave of it, at least.
Yeah, I was obviously, because of the time frame, I was able to just, I mean, there is an A to Z biography of the bands, which is able to go up to the then present day. So a lot of the biographies are still correct, but there are still a handful of bands, and actually probably a few more sort of coming out again now that are back releasing new music as well. And there was a few sort of features in there I did as well, and stuff like that. But yeah, it's funny how we are kind of talking about nu metal still in 2023 when
nothing new about it.
For the big part, it has been often maligned by the heavy metal community. There's obviously, it's been a very niche market,
hated.
but it is still flourishing, especially after the Sick New World concert in America a few weeks ago. Hell of a lineup.
You guys know I'm doing Des Fafara's autobiography at the moment. You guys know that?
Yes.
I was going to channel Mick Wall and just go, you've got a personal come professional relationship with Nez, haven't you? And then he could have done, yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I could have gone on about how he was a good mate of mine. Yeah, like I did with Glenn Hughes. So this was just announced last month, and Des has been doing press for it. It's not out till later this year. But the reason I mention that and drop it in is because of Sick New World, right? Which I think is the most amazing event. Like, someone had some serious courage to put that on. I mean, it was a massive event. The list of bands was huge. And, you know, and you had Cold Chamber, which was a big band back in the day, and they were like in the fourth line, you know what I mean? It was like, it was massive. And apparently it was really good. Des said it was incredible. So sorry, I kind of deflected your flow a little bit there, but what I was going to go on to say was that who would have thought all these years later that these bands would still not only be alive and well and together, but actually doing good business at events like this. And there's some small bands on there as well that are still going. It's not like it's just the big three, which I know is something you wanted to talk about. I was amazed when I saw that festival was coming out. That is going to kickstart so many reformations. Basically, Cold Chamber were going to do stuff anyway, and they have more stuff lined up. But this definitely sort of accelerated that process. Be interesting to see which bands we don't want to reform.
I'm gonna give you sort of like my pitch, because again, this is like, I wasn't really there. The lens I looked at this through or lived through was Napster era, trying to download Metallica videos, and they were all Woodstock 99 and came bundled with the other footage. And you had an idea of what kind of the visibility was. So when I think of like nu metal, I think of usually like a summer festival aesthetic. But when you think about it, and and this is what I think is happening now, that the oversaturation of media and the pandemic sort of creating a podcast heavy and dialogue heavy environment around this stuff. I think like our language has matured a bit and we're starting to look back on these things differently. And I don't think, and it'd be remiss of us to have this conversation without talking about what is nu metal, but at the same time it's pointless because it feels more of a movement than it was a genre. It was like, well, this is alternative popular music using non-traditional instrumentation. It certainly wasn't pop. It's kind of like, in the same way grunge happened in the 90s, in the early 90s, nu metal happened later on. It was more of an investment profile and a music at the same, and certain kinds of music at the same time. There's a very certain kind of production value in the videos. There's big sort of like big industry events built around them, like Ozfest. I think it's difficult because now we call it nu metal and we have these things associated with nu metal, but I think it's much grander than that. I think it's more of a, what's the word I'm looking for, authors?
Well, I would say it It was when metal expanded to include a whole load of other people who had previously not been welcome, i.e. women, right?
Mm.
And it became okay, as just as grunge had done for hard rock, to talk about, emotional matters. And it was just a kind of a maturation, I think,
Yeah.
of metal, In fact, you could liken new metal and previous metal to grunge and hair metal a bit, couldn't you? Similar sort of thing
Okay.
happened. It grew up, got a bit more serious, and then it got taken over by the industry, as I think you basically hinted before.
Yeah, I think it is those things. It's the maturation of the genre, but it feels like there's these pockets of years where, okay, Nirvana happens, then everyone's trying to sign the next Nirvana, and they go, "Whoa, actually, that's not going to work." But there's this band called Korn and Deftones seem to be doing really well. Okay, let's all get around that. And then a few years later, we go, okay, there's a band called My Chemical Romance. All right, everyone fuck off from that now. We're going to go and do this thing. And it kind of feels like our perception of it now, I don't think it's a resurgence personally. Again, this is where you guys can correct me because I'm an idiot and I'm just sort of taking my limited lens. And I don't think it's a resurgence. I think it's a prequelization. Like the Star Wars prequels, just for some reason, everyone loves them now. And we've kind of forgiven it. We've kind of just gone, well, it was a period in time. It was a different kind of thing. This is just where the market was. That's what's happening, because we're not going to see a $3 bill or level investment in a particular artist that's going to sound the same as that stuff. While there are cycles, and we're going to see a lot of bands like that, we're not going to see multi-platinum selling, turntables and big grooves and things like that. It's a completely different era. I feel we're just having a bit more of a mature look at what happened then and kind of taking it for what it is, which is great for the market because it means we can get Dry Kill Logic back on tour and it makes it more viable.
Are they touring?
I don't think that they keep teasing more music, but they are still together. But what's your perception of that, Matt? Because I think as someone who lived through it, I think you're probably best placed to tell me if it is a resurgence, or am I right in sort of saying we're just looking at it through a different lens and allowing more things in?
Yeah, I think this the second of those. Like you said, you're not going to get the gold and platinum selling records anymore. I mean, obviously, I think a big part of nu metal's downfall in sort of 2003, 2004 was from illegal downloading. That it was just a wave that just killed the industry back then. I mean, today that Sick New World lineup, obviously I'm familiar with most of those bands. A lot of them now perhaps only have one original member in their lineup, so it is kind of like just a quick trek around, sort of relive the glory days. A lot of people want to go and hear perhaps those one or two songs that were huge on the radio back in the day. Limp Bizkit, I mean, they're the band that obviously they've always had a love-hate, or people have had a love-hate relationship with them, but they've just, since sort of Fred Durst came back dressed in the old man's wig and the granddad trousers and all that, something seems to have clicked with them in terms of sending them back. Obviously the media, if you don't like them, you can blame the media for it, but they just seem to have elevated themselves again. They released that brief Still Sucks album a couple of years ago now, I think, and we'll get new music from them. So that sort of level band that was big back in the day, I think they'll always have their time in the spotlight. Their music will be graciously received by the fan base, but for the rest of them, I think it is just, let's just keep touring if we can, perhaps release the odd song. A lot of bands are doing it independently these days as well, or very small labels have sort of taken them on. So resurgence, probably not so much, because like you said, that would include big record sales and stadium tours and arena tours, where in the likelihood, especially in America, a lot of these bands tend to play smaller venues, or even these sort of bar and grill venues that perhaps have a small stage in the background. But it's just reliving the heyday, and a lot of the fans are obviously loving it.
Every Vince Neil video you see reported on Blabbermouth is always at the something bar and grill.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing is, you won't see Fred Durst on the front cover of USA Today or one of those giant magazines, or, even if those magazines exist. And you won't see him on MTV because he's going out with Christina Aguilera. That kind of mainstream penetration of the culture, that's no longer there. Members of Slipknot have died, haven't they? And there hasn't really been that much coverage outside the metal press. Whereas in 2001, that would have been global news, headline news. So that's another way of measuring a band's prominence, or sort of standing. How much are the media interested? And frankly, the media are not. outside the obvious magazines that we know and love. You know,
and I think that's to just wrap that bit up. While we talk about resurgence and one, I think what people are just realizing is this was the last great era of a conventionally popular alternative music, because it just once, and as Matt, you pointed out, once downloads came in, that's when the oversaturation started, and you couldn't rally everyone around one thing, or the media just doesn't have the means to rally everyone around one thing anymore. I don't think. Does that sound about right? The last great alternative thing.
It was, I mean, obviously the record the industry took a massive hit on the back of the downloads as well, and off the top of my head, it was probably only 5 or 6 years before the first streaming services came in. I'm not sure.
Right about.
So
peak of sales, wasn't it? Sorry, mate. The peak of CD sales, I think, was like 2001 or 2002. But that's when the number of billions of that generated. Then you had illegal downloads for 5 years. Then you had iTunes. So you had legal downloads, and then you had the streaming services 5 years later, and that was it. It was over, you know.
So it's easier for bands to get the music out there these days, and like I say, some of the new metal bands that are putting songs out, perhaps they're able to do it without sort of physically releasing them as well. But I lived that era, and I would say that was the last great era.
The comparison
in
between
metal, right? Because don't forget, you've got all this other music in hip hop and going on elsewhere that we're not talking about, you know.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the metrics of what becomes popular and what becomes sort of in vogue, it's a completely separate conversation. And you know, the sphere of revenue and marketability and branding and how that works. Obviously, the big conversation now is about the money generated from touring and the merch fees and things like that. And that's like people have forgotten that there was an entire system on the record side which has just completely died out. But that's a different pursuit, I think. But let's move on to onto the history of the genre itself. So in terms of milestone moments, I think there's, in both your books, you kind of cite Chili Peppers, Faith No More. There's a lot of different things going on which have led to this beast. And I think it culminates in Korn's debut. But I wonder if you had in your head, in the timeline of nu metal, what's the big sort of moment that triggers everything off? In the same way Chuck Berry is for metal, right? The lobby will drag it back to that. Do you guys have a particular milestone that sort of led us down the path that we've gone?
I have, if you don't mind me kicking off.
Yeah, you go first, Joe.
All right, I was explaining this to my kids the other day. So late 80s, you had Walk This Way and you had Bring the Noise, okay? First sort of rap, metal, novelty hits. Then you had funk metal, Faith No More, Chili Peppers. Then you had rap metal in the first Rage Against the Machine album. And then when grunge came along, all that meshed into nu metal with Korn's first record. Then you had the first Slipknot, first Limp Bizkit in 97, 98, and the first Slipknot in 99, and that is how I see it. So there's a clear sort of 10 to 12 year sort of spectrum of metal slightly changing. But I remember very clearly those late 80s hits by Anthrax and by Run DMC that kicked it off. So that's how I see it, Matt. You may differ.
That is a sort of decent little timeline there. But in terms of if you sort of asking when nu metal kind of became sort of elevated itself, I think it was 98, Korn and Limp Bizkit. Limp Bizkit was 99. They both had #1 albums on the Billboard 200. So that seems to be where the mainstream attention really grew. Obviously, Korn's first couple of albums, especially the first one, they were slightly more underground for a little while. They was getting out on tours with Ozzy Osbourne. They were getting their name out there. Obviously, it was still, for some people, it's still a little bit harder to embrace what Korn was doing. But yeah, in terms of the mainstream part, it seemed to be Follow the Leader was what, they did a massive promotional campaign for it, from what I remember. Got the Life, I think, was the lead single, and that was then spread all over MTV, all over the music channels, and that was where that sort of hybrid of the funky disco kind of beat with grating guitars and JD's vocals. Limp Bizkit followed in 99, and then obviously Woodstock hit for
Woodstock 99
for the wrong
seen that
reason.
Film? Seen the documentary?
There's two. There's the HBO one, and then there's a Netflix one, isn't there?
Yeah,
right. So I saw the I saw the recent one, whatever, the one that's in 3 parts. It was
with Fatboy
gold.
Slim. It is
Yeah,
good,
yeah,
isn't it?
pure gold. It was terrible, terrifying, but so good. Such stupidity, putting a festival on an what is it, a runway made of
Yeah.
Yeah.
concrete in 9 billion degrees.
Mm. Yeah, it was
Oh,
very crazy. It's still well, obviously just looking back at the news stories of all the everything that went on there, you know, obviously the music was fantastic, the performances were fantastic, but I don't think anybody really remembers that anymore.
it's funny, people. I think my kids were saying to me the other day because we all watched it. Was it Fred Durst's fault? You know, the destruction that happened during break stuff or whatever. And I said, no, I don't think it was actually. That's just, you know, if you're in that kind of band, you kind of whip up the crowd. It's not like he said, go and kill everybody, each other. He just said, let's go nuts, or words to that effect. And what else? What else are you going to do? Stand there quietly and ask everyone to calm down? You know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And you forget that Rage was there as well, and Metallica was there.
Metallica.
There was one just, you know, Metallica at that point was like, as much as you want to talk about the watered down era of the 90s, you know, just not even 10 years prior, there were riots when they were on that Guns N' Roses tour.
Right.
You know, so it's like, what are you going to do? So could we argue there was a perfect storm in that sort of like trilogy of years, wasn't there? So you have Ozfest, which I think plays into the Slipknot story in a massive way. Woodstock 99, which had, I don't know if it was all retrospective Woodstock 99 in terms of the cultural implications it had. But it's certainly, when I was trying to download Metallica videos, and you get everything in that. You get everything. That's how they did it in the Kazaa days. You couldn't download just like one Metallica video. You had to get like a load of different bands in one thing. It was like that Moscow show that Pantera did. You know, you had Metallica, AC/DC, and the Pantera bit. So whenever I saw Woodstock 99, it was always the full bill, and it was just felt like, all right, this was clearly a massive moment in time, but I don't know if it felt like that at the time. And I'm sure, Matt, you can't comment because you must have been about my age. Like you can't get it.
For what year exactly? Sorry,
99.
99. So yeah, it was 2000 that I actually first got into the new metal. So yeah, even it was bigger. Yeah, obviously by then I started getting Kerrang, and I was quickly able to see that Korn, Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, Deftones, System of a Down, they were the big bands coming through. And yeah, everyone else just seemed to follow. Yeah, the record labels sort of, you know, they soon knew that was where the money was going to be. They were snapping up anybody and everybody that had some kind of similar sound. It didn't work for a lot of them.
Or look. Sometimes it's just about the look.
Yeah.
Actually, Des talks a lot about that in his book, because Coal Chamber had that. They were the leaders, weren't they, of looking completely nuts to start with. It's a really interesting story, actually. But to me, Woodstock 99 was just yet another massive festival in an era when there were loads of massive festivals. I mean, the Ozfest was huge, right? So, and Woodstock was big because it had that name attached to it, obviously. But Woodstock 94 hadn't really made that much of an impact outside America. So 99 was just another one, you know what I mean? And Metallica were doing these giant tours everywhere. So everything was on such a large scale in metal. With Maiden as well, doing all that stuff. Woodstock 99 didn't seem as big a deal as it does now.
Sure, right, got you. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make the argument that there was a perfect storm of things that were happening, but I think Matt's probably more accurate in saying, no, people just saw the numbers and started getting around it. And I can speak about that from a Roadrunner perspective, but, you know, with the bands like Spineshank and Coal Chamber and the likes of. In terms of retrospectively, you mentioned a big three, Joel, in yours. Do you think that stands up?
Yeah.
And where's Linkin Park in that?
Well, Linkin Park, right, okay. They're a difficult one, aren't they?
Linkin Park kind of sort of led the second wave, I've always sort of felt. From 2000, Hybrid Theory was, I think, late 2000. 2001 seemed to be the next elevation of the rap.
Have you
got this in waves then, Matt, in your head?
Yeah. To me, 2001 was like the second wave that sort of brought up Baroque. I think Stained was 2001. And they even had a #1 album over here.
Yeah,
that was sort of separated.
I'm on the outside.
Yep.
We used to come back from the pub. And watch Kerrang TV, like I'm sure you guys did, and it was always on there, wasn't it? Along with Chop Suey and all those others.
It was the live video because you sung it with Fred. That was the one that was on Kerrang all the time. So let's break that down.
Fred shouts out to the crowd, doesn't he? Because where are they? They're in New Orleans or saying, "Hey, you can hear me." It's actually quite good. I used to really enjoy that. I haven't watched it for years. I suppose I'll have to now.
I saw
I
the
got an
bowling
email from Fred Durst once. I came back from the pub and there was an email from Fred. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I never saw that Stained video. I saw the Bowling for Soup parody of it before I saw the Stained video, the one where he's like lighting
Oh,
pictures
yeah,
on
yeah.
fire. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So break down the waves then for me, Matt, because like this is structure, and I like structure.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm on the spot. Yes, I mean, yeah.
I don't mind if it's woolly.
A lot of people, I mean, I one of my favorite bands still to this day, Deftones. I think they're just such a consistent band. They're, you know, even changing the style, they just do it effortlessly. They came out with White Pony in 2000, which was probably their most successful record. But yeah, like I say, 2000, by then you had Korn. Slipknot was getting big on the back of their first album. Limp Bizkit was huge. 2001 was when sort of Linkin Park, especially over, maybe it's just my perception from in the UK, because I was getting the singles from Woolworths, God rest its soul. I used to love that shop. I was able to get all the singles, and it seemed to be upon I think in the end was their fourth single from Hybrid Theory. That was the one that obviously it sort of brought in more of an alternative fan base as well, even pop fans. So 2001, then we had Papa Roach come in there. Stained, Break the Cycle. Thinking back now, I think it was 2001. They was helped to be signed by Fred Durst. He brought along. I think they did have an album out before 2001, but it was it went under the radar. Then they got their big record deal ahead of Break the Cycle. System of a Down's Toxicity. That was 2001, I think.
And we're still in second wave here.
And that was the one that sort of put them. They released the first album. I think in America they was fairly popular, but not worldwide.
Is that a new metal band though? Because that's always bothered me a bit. I'm not really sure that they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. See, I've
that's
always
another debate.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that I felt nu metal was a movement rather than a genre. Because I mean, Mike Sarkassian from Spineshank, when we spoke for the book, he was saying, you know, at the start all the bands were coming out of Los Angeles. You had Spineshank, Cold Chamber, Incubus, System of a Down, Snot. They was all playing on the same bill, but do any of them sound the same? And then the LA metal tag had to kind of be altered because Limp Bizkit were coming up in Florida and Slipknot were coming up in Iowa. I believe from what I've read, I think Kerrang may have coined the nu metal term for the first time. And just
he used to have an umlaut on the U. Do you remember?
Yeah, yeah. And also just thinking,
yeah, you know.
And just thinking with Joel, obviously he's writing it's written the Des Fafara book. It's also I can't verify obviously, but supposedly the first ever band to be labelled nu metal was indeed Cold Chamber from a live review back in the possibly even 95. I'm not sure exactly when, without looking in my book, when
it's possible. It is totally possible. Des doesn't remember. He's got mixed views about the nu metal tag, as you would imagine.
Yeah,
I think it was Korn, and I also think it was an American term first. But
yeah,
it's hard to know.
Perhaps just a local reporter or perhaps someone gave that term, but it was to Cold Chamber reportedly anyway.
I mean, people definitely called it new NEW metal as a term for ages. I remember that really clearly, new metal, and it didn't seem like a cheesy term at all because it was spelt regularly. Yes, so my journalistic colleagues.
Yeah, I've definitely got it written down somewhere, but I can't find the fuck. It's someone came up with it. But no,
was there a third wave as well, Matt, as you sit after System and that lot?
A third wave kind of incorporated a lot of the post-grunge bands. So, I mean, Cold, they were about from, I think their first album came out in 97, sort of, again, under the radar. But then you had a lot of bands like Trapped, the fantastically named Hoobastank, who did the Reason. I think that video was on all the charts at the time.
Glassjaw was around that time.
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Glassjaw the last few days, and I see them get put in that nu metal tag, but I still kind of feel they're more of the next wave of like the metalcore.
Sure. Right.
Mike Gitter says that Glassjaw was a band without context.
Yeah, for some reason, I kind of still have a little correlation between them and Deftones. I'm not sure why, even though Glassjaw, I mean, they haven't released as much music over the years, but they've always remained sort of more abrasive. And but I've always sort of held them together for some reason. But yeah,
Difficult, isn't it?
the post grunge sort of 2003, and then I still remember on Kerrang. Then the next video that came on after all these was My Last Serenade by Killswitch, and then I remember just watching that and thinking, okay, something's changing now, something's coming.
My favorite thing, my favorite sort of commentary on Hoobastank, there was a video that was floating around ages ago. This was like first generation YouTube stuff. There was a guy dressed as a wizard who used to hang out outside of Hoobastank shows, and he'd go there with an A-frame and a big like whiteboard on it, and on it there'd be like 5 bits of cards that are covering up other words. And what he'd do is he'd say, right, all of you come here, like I want you to list me the top 5 Hoobastank songs, and they'd come up, they'll all have like a bit of a this is like a 20-minute video of all the fans going, all right, I think it's this, blah, 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 blah. And they go through and the reason would be at the top, and they go, well done, guys, thanks very much. And this just a guy just as a wizard with a microphone, megaphone even, and he just goes, I'm sorry to inform you all, you're all wrong. And he just take off these cards, and it'd be like number 5, not applicable, number 4, not applicable, and he'd do it all the way to the end, and then right, fuck off, and he'd just leave. It was back when trolling was done in person, and sometimes invited violence. Anyway,
it's tough when you only have one big hit, right? Like you mentioned Spineshank before, Matt. I really liked that one song. Is it called
New Disease? Is the big one.
I think that was a great song.
Yeah.
At the time, it's super catchy, and then they couldn't keep it together, could they? Really, not in the long term. That was it.
They did one more album in that little sort of time. Then they split up, and then they came back with Anger, Denial, Acceptance, and obviously less. I think they were signed to, was it the Century Media at that time when they released that album? Obviously, Roadrunner had the 3 albums, but I still love Spineshank. Yeah, I think they were a great band to come out at that time. Obviously
good songs. I think if you add it all up, there's a lot of good songs. I mean, but not enough probably for the whole thing to sustain itself, and I think it just looked too ridiculous, and it got dated really fast. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I'm sure you want to talk about it. Why did it die?
I just want to quickly mention in terms of on the whole resurgence thing. I'm a big record collector, vinyl, and there has been a ton of new metal albums that have been pressed over the last few years that you never would have thought, including Spineshank. Their first 2 albums have been pressed. Il Nino, the Latin metal, they were signed to Roadrunner. Their first 2 albums have been repressed. There's so somewhere there's a few bootlegs involved in there as well, but some of these vinyl pressing companies, they're seeing the value in, even if it's just a limited run of maybe 1,000, 2,000.
There you go.
To be seeing
these are expensive items, so you do a short run, you make a load of money, because people will spend 50 quid on a box set, but they won't spend a £5 on a CD. So that's the logic now. So. Coltrane, we've got a box set coming out quite soon. These things are lovely artifacts, aren't they?
Oh yeah, definitely. And for a collector, I mean, I'm sure we all use streaming at some point, but I've always felt you can't beat the physical product.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
Looping back to what sort of started off the waves conversation, Big 3, do we still think that's a thing? Do we think Big 3 is still a good way to help navigate?
After you, Matt.
I think 3 definitely. Yeah, the Korn, Limp Bizkit, and Slipknot, and then there's always been, I've seen questions on new metal forums and whatnot, perhaps trying to add a 4th one in like they did with the Thrash 4. But yeah, there's a ton of bands you could pick for that 4th spot, but to avoid any sort of arguments and that, the 3 that have been mentioned are shoe-ins for sure.
Did Slipknot break away?
Slipknot moved away from that sound, didn't they? Right? Yeah. They just became a regular metal band, so that's how they did it. Limp Bizkit are solely touring for the nostalgia value of the old stuff. No one gives a fuck about anything since about 99, 2000 maybe, 2001.
Yeah.
And Korn, actually, of that lot, I've got to give them props really, because they just ploughed that same follow. I know they've done some dubstep stuff along the way and been a bit different, but they just basically keep going, don't they? And the quality remains high, I have to say.
Definitely.
But maybe there's only room for those 3 bands, at a top level.
Yeah, I mean, if I had a gun to my head and you've got to pick a 4th, then I probably would go Deftones. But I know that I think from the very early days, Deftones didn't really want to be part of that whole scene anyway. I believe there was supposed to be a co-headline tour with Korn set up, I think it was, and they refused to do it because they just didn't want to be part of what Korn was sort of doing and everything. But Like I say, Deftones, they've kind of become their own band. They're just amazing still now, and so they quickly, especially after White Pony, they released their self-titled fourth album. They sort of, you could tell they was trying to steer clear of that movement as far as they could.
I interviewed Chi Cheng once.
Oh,
I had
really?
a long talk with him. Yeah, I was so sorry that he died. He was a sweetheart. You would really like that guy.
No doubt. Yeah.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, it was sad because they're sitting on a whole album or at least half an album's worth of material that he was on that they're not sure if they ever will release, which is a shame.
Great band.
And they worked really hard to keep his medical bills paid. That was like an agenda item for the next few tour cycles, wasn't it? Just
It's America.
yeah. Joel, you mentioned something before we started in earnest. You said Michelle had a massive role in this thing. I imagine you mean UK centric, or was there? I felt like there was a story there, and I felt like there was a thing there. I don't know if you.
I mean,
if there is.
So for those who don't know, Michelle Kerr and her colleague Kirsten Springs, they were the PR people for Roadrunner Records in the UK in the 90s and a bit beyond, quite a long way beyond. And okay, you might think, right, well, PR people, big deal, you know, but actually a lot of the new metal bands had a massive audience in the UK. And I ascribe that not solely to Michelle and Kirsten, but they were tireless at promoting those bands, right? I remember clearly Iowa landing on my desk, right? And opening it up because they posted out CDs, right? And going, wow, this looks great, can't wait to play it. And the magazine Record Collector, we were going to do an interview with one of Slipknot, right? And I think because I'd done my Slipknot book, that it was difficult to get an interview, I think. I can't really remember. I think management had a bit of a problem. Certainly wasn't anything to do with the band or Michelle or anything like that, but I think management were being a bit dickish about it. But she managed to get Joey on the phone. And like that was hard to do. So Michelle really worked really hard to make that happen. And a lot of PR people are just not like that, right? They're just not that bothered, not as professional, not as hardworking. But those two, Michelle and Kirsten, who are really nice, they're good friends of mine, went above and beyond to push those bands in a way that I think paid off, not just for those bands, but for the new metal sound. It had a big presence in the UK. And because it had a big presence in the UK, that filtered into Europe. So those bands would quite often do signings here, wouldn't they? Or they'd launch their tours here or whatever. And that's why I think those two PR people are important, to answer your question, over and above the role of most regular PRs.
I think there's a bigger conversation about the role of UK in outlier artists and genres, and I think those two have a massive role in that. Roadrunner has a role in that, I think. It's just fascinating. Just like, I can't remember going, I don't know if you share the same sentiment, Matt, but like, I can't remember going to a gig when I was younger and not having the road crew, as in the Roadrunner road crew, the street team, flyer in. Yeah, you'd find fucking CDs like under the windshield of your car, all like the promo stuff, and it's just like, you couldn't. I mean, like, I get it because like the UK is a smaller island, so there's a geographical advantage to doing that as opposed to the United States and Europe. But yeah, there's something there. There's something in the infrastructure of how they did it, which had a massive knock-on effect as to what. Yeah, definitely. So there's an elephant in the room we haven't mentioned yet, and that's Ross Robinson.
Why is he an elephant?
Because like all these bands, there's like Korn's debut, obviously Slipknot. There's something that I was expecting when I said, oh, what were the milestones for the genre? I was expecting one of you to say, because I don't know much about Ross. Oh yeah, when he was 3, Ross fell over and he bumped his head, and since then he just loved a particular aesthetic, and then that fed into everything. I was half expecting that because he has had a massive impact on the genre as well. I remember listening to a podcast with him not too long ago, and he had a particular affinity with only working with new bands. And like that gestation period in like those first sort of 18, 24 months is the thing he'd like to get involved in. Does that match up with any of your understandings? And Joel, have you got any war stories from back in the day with him?
Well, I did a massive interview with him, about his whole career once. This is years ago. This is probably about 2004 or something. And I thought he was a really cool guy. And what was that? I can't remember so long ago now, right? So I was doing something. I did Max Cavalera's autography as well, right? Who wasn't Sepultura, as you guys know, went on to be in Soulfly, who had a new metal moment, although he doesn't like to think of it that way. But And Ross, what was the controversy? Someone in Corn had said that Sepultura had stolen the sound. That was it. Or was it? I just can't remember who said what. It was a bit of a he said, she said situation.
Right.
Someone, whether in Corn or out of Corn, had complained that Sepultura had stolen Corn's sound for their Roots album in '96, right? Which actually holds up a little bit. There's something to that.
Well, Max always says he
It's
was
not,
listening to
yeah,
that.
it's not cut and dried.
Yeah.
No, Max doesn't say it. It's more, none of Sepultura ever said this. This was someone either in Corn or around Corn. I can't remember who it was. And I said this to Ross. I said, "Do you know people are saying that Sepultura ripped off your sound?" And he was pissed off
Really?
and said, "Who said that? Who said that?" I think it was like now. I can't remember. I couldn't remember then who said it, let alone now. I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I read it somewhere," and it turned into a massive conversation, and it was fine. And we ended up having a good laugh, but it made me think, and it's useful for this conversation. Well, what was Ross's role? I mean, first he encouraged, those bands to come out with those incredibly confessional lyrics that he'd done with Korn on Daddy and the other songs that Jonathan Davis really came out of himself on. Same to an extent with Slipknot. And he had that sound, didn't he, as well, that big down-tuned fat sound, which a lot of people ascribe to Fear Factory, funnily enough. That's a whole other band which I like, but that's a whole other thing. Was that in your metal band? Or was it an industrial metal band? Where the hell were they? Because they started out as a full-on death metal band, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, again, I'm not trying to promote my own work here, but Des keeps saying about the impact of Fear Factory on that LA sound, right? And until he said that, I hadn't really thought of it, but they've been going for years, haven't they, before the new metal lot came along. Anyway, so I haven't really answered your question, but Ross had this giant role, didn't he? Because he was the go-to guy. I remember very clearly Slayer considering him to produce, I think, what became God Hates Us All, which came out on 9/11, didn't it?
Yeah.
And right in the middle of this, and that's a whole other conversation. What were the thrash bands doing while new metal was going on? And the answer is not very well, right? And but Ross was definitely in the mix for all this stuff. And then, unfortunately, I think his prominence fell as the new metal wave itself receded, because he was known for this particular sound, wasn't he? I haven't actually kept up with his career since then. I knew he's still working and he's done really well for himself. He's a good bloke, Ross, but he definitely was tied in, wasn't he, with that sound quite profoundly, to the point where Korn actually, do you remember, if you pulled out the CD of the first record, you've got a page for each of them and then another page for Ross, as if he's a member of the band, which kind of shows you how much they regarded him as integral to their sound, right? So that's my thoughts on Ross Robinson,
Go on then, Matt. You give us the skit, because you interviewed him for the book, didn't you?
Yeah, somehow. Yeah. I remember at the time when
it's real coup to get that.
Yeah, I was at the time there. So I was trying to sort of approach musicians that were active online, because at the time I didn't have any contacts within industry, and whether they would have let me, the bigger bands are kind of off limits. And yeah, I think I'd messaged him just one day, and then about 3 months later, I think I still remember, I got home from work. There was some food on the stove cooking, and then my phone pinged, and I just happened to, and it was him. Just got done in the studio, give me an hour and we'll chat. Nice. I had no preparation whatsoever, so I think I turned the stove off, let the food just go to waste. And then we spoke for a couple of hours that night. And the thing that I drew, I mean, obviously a lot of time has passed since 2000s and the late 90s, when he was working with Korn and Slipknot. Obviously he developed a bit of a thing for sort of really taking the musicians to the darkest depths of their soul to get out obviously the best performances. Like Joel said with Jonathan Davis, he would make him cry in the studio and try and relive all the agony and whatnot. But yeah, maybe because time had passed, he was very sensitive. I sort of felt when I spoke to him, he was very reflective. He knew. Just think about the albums he produced, like the first two Korns. He did $3 Bill, the first two Slipknots, and he actually sort of opened up about how devastated he was not to get the gig for Follow the Leader, because he just presumed that he had done the first two Korn albums. He presumed that was a relationship that was potentially going to, remain solid for forever. And and then he actually talks about 2010 he produced their Korn 3 Remember Who You Are album, and how he just expected everything was going to be the same, but of course there was band members had gone and left, and they had kids, they were more grown up, and things changed. But yeah, for in terms of the new metal, for a little period there, I presume, like I say, I was sort of 2000, but anybody that was really keen on the new metal, they probably wouldn't have been surprised to see that Ross Robinson had a production credit on a lot of these albums that was coming out. And yeah, he did seem to, the sound he got from the bands in the studio and on record, you kind of can instantly tell it was a Ross Robinson piece of work. One of the newest albums that I can think of that he produced was...
See, that's the downfall, isn't it? When something is that recognizable. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you froze for a sec, so I thought I'd stop talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be, yeah, because there's
if you're that identifiable, it's really hard, isn't it, to move on?
Yeah, there's a producer, I can't think of his name at the minute, but he does a lot of records, or I think he's done everyone for like Five Finger Death Punch. In this moment, they all seem to sound the same. You can you can instantly tell that he doesn't seem to, whether...
I know the guy, yeah, I can't remember his name.
Yeah, I can't think of his name, but every album sounds the same. But yeah, I guess with Ross, like I said, the last album that I'm aware that he did was a Touche Amore album. They're a melodic hardcore band, and even that you can kind of tell. You wouldn't know perhaps instantly without, if you knew Ross had done it, then you can kind of feel that he's got his vibe to it. But
Didn't he do something with the Cure?
The Cure 2004.
Oh, he did that one, did he?
See, that's cool. I actually never heard it, but I could totally see that working.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the album, but I wasn't aware he'd done that one. Yeah, I think he did.
Yeah.
If he didn't do both Glassjaw albums, I think he did. Did he do Worship and Tribute as well? I think he put his name on that one. Can't remember.
Yeah, Worship and Tribute. When was the other Glassjaw one?
That was before that, so probably 98, something like that. Can't remember if he did that one as well. It was a road runner.
I always wondered if he might sort of transcend metal and end up being a Rick Rubin, who had similar kind of roots in one identifiable area, and then just went on to be the super guy, didn't he? And did Johnny Cash, and like the biggest artist on the planet, fucking Paul McCartney. So I always wondered whether maybe Ross had that idea in mind, that trajectory. Hence the Cure, right?
Yeah, I've noticed. I think he has done a few more sort of alternative rock, maybe even sort of like electronic rock kind of bands, ones. So he has definitely sort of branched out a bit.
His Wikipedia article is somewhat limited, as I think Discog's going to give us a bit more, enlighten us a bit more. He did another Sepultura album in 2013. He did Suicide Silence in 2017.
Yes, and that is you can tell that's Ross as well. That is really like a dirty sound, a really sort of that was instantly. I've only, in my book, I've only sort of written the sort of the new metal related albums that he worked on.
Yeah. He did Dead Cross. Yeah, last year. I think the
Dead Cross, right?
Yeah, the last thing I heard of him, again, it's a different interview, was he was working with Sid Wilson on incubating some artist. I think it was like literally just some new thing, and I think they've like created a label to push it. So similar to like the I Am stuff, which was his label in the 90s, which is what brought on, I think, Glassjaw started there, and then there was some sort of partnership with Roadrunner I'm yet to explore, to be honest. But yeah, no, a fascinating dude.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know in Dez's book he talks about how Coal Chamber got on Roadrunner because Dino from Fear Factory was doing some A&R, right? So Dino spotted Coal Chamber playing in Hollywood. Dez gave him their demo. Dino gave the demo to Monty Connor, and that's how the deal with Roadrunner arrived. So why did I say that just now? I don't know. That was relevant to what you just said. Because Ross Robinson. No, sorry, because of Ross Robinson. Sorry. So, what was it? He was either going to do it and didn't, or something happened. He was involved in the early conversations anyway, right? So he was right in there, right at the start, Ross.
Yeah, I've read. Yeah, just touching on a lot of people I speak to as well. They credit Dino with helping especially like the Los Angeles sector of new metal.
Yeah,
he was doing a lot of actually. Yeah, in the book I spoke to Meeks from Coal Chamber, and he was talking about Dino did a lot for for the LA portion of the bands over there.
That album, Digimortal, that was pure new metal, and I will not be told otherwise, right?
Definitely, yeah.
That chunky, noise gatey sound, you know, down tuned to fuck. You know, there wasn't a DJ, but it might as well have been. You know, there's like 10 Sid Wilsons, aren't there, on operating weird samples in the background.
And they
listened to that for a while.
Yeah, and then also I wrote a small like essay in the book about the collaborations with hip hop. Obviously, new metal and hip hop was a big thing. Who was on? There was it the Cypress Hill guy? Was it Public Enemy guy on Digimortal? He did one track.
One of those, probably, yeah.
I can't think off the top of my head, but obviously.
Oh, well, the whole special guest thing, right? I mean, that is a whole podcast on its own.
Yeah.
You know, that is wicked. That first Soulfly with Fred Durst on it, when Max didn't even know who he was. And, oh, my God, you know, because what Limp Bizkit were coming up in 97, weren't they? And then the whole hip-hop thing just endlessly fascinates me. People always talk about that first Korn album being so hip-hoppy, and it is a bit. There's that one little, at the end of, is it the end of Blind, or one of them, where they do that little homage to a Cypress Hill bass part? I can't remember which one it is. Anyway, you probably don't want to get into that because we'll be here all day.
Yeah. What do you reckon to the bass sounds then, Joel? The really clunky, man. really loose. Because I personally I struggle with it a bit.
So for anyone who doesn't know who's listening to this or watching this, I was the editor of Bass Player magazine for years, right? So this is why I have a perspective on it. So Fieldy's bass playing is innovative. It genuinely is an innovative new way of playing, but fuck me, it sounds awful. And I could never get into it at all. And he's a good guy. I've met him many, many times. But and then what's the name? Rayner from Cold Chamber used that exact same tone. And one reason why Cold Chamber are always so negatively compared to Korn. And it's that whole ding, 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 sounds like a typewriter being chucked down some stairs. It's not for me. I get it. I do get it. Ross was trying to find a way for the bass tones to cut through those massive down-tuned guitars, right? I get it. It's hard. So I admire it, but I don't like it, if you know what I mean.
It's like with these days you'll see people doing like guitar covers on like an Instagram reel or something like that, and sometimes it's just like you can hear the pick hitting the strings and it really just takes you completely out of it. I get that from those bass tones. It just feels a little bit. You can take
those frequencies out, but they left them in because they needed something to be heard from the bass player.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Interesting. Moving forward then, what do you regard as like the fall of the genre then? Was it in a similar capacity as what were the milestones early doors? Is there anything that went, was it Fieldy leaving? Was it Wes Borland leaving? Was it?
Question for Matt, I think, a recent expert on the genre more than me.
I still credit a lot of it to the illegal downloading, in terms of sending obviously the record labels lost a lot of money, probably lost faith in the bands they had signed. There was so many albums that were written, recorded, done and shelved that was never released. A lot of bands obviously lost their record deals. I vaguely remember the first time, like I said, I mentioned earlier, Killswitch Engage's My Last Serenade video. So from that, I could tell there was kind of something different coming. You had that new wave of American metal with Lamb of God. I think Five Finger Death Punch were a little bit after
Forbid.
That. And then a lot of like the emo, screamo stuff. But I do as well remember Wes Borland left Limp Bizkit ahead of their Results May Vary album.
I got a funny story about that. I'll tell you that in a minute.
Yeah. Chocolate Starfish obviously sold millions and millions. Results May Vary came out and it absolutely flopped. And from someone sort of in that time thinking about everything that was happening, that just seemed to be where everything peaked and then just literally just nosedived off a cliff. I think Korn, they released Untouchables, so that was 2002. That leaked online about a month before it came out, which, it still sold good numbers, but I believe that it should have sold probably 3 or 4 million more at least, had it not suffered from that. So I do, kind of credit illegal downloading and then obviously just a new scene coming in from elsewhere.
I just think people got bored. People just had seen Fred and his red cap too many times. And the tracksuits that caught, people just got sick of it. It's natural to move on. And it had such intense media coverage, right? I remember you could not get away from Chocolate Starfish, right? There must have been what, 4 or 5 singles off that record,
Yeah.
and I really liked that Mission Impossible one.
Mhm.
What's it called? Take a Look
Look
Around.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's still a tune, right? I still listen to that today. And you know, all the other the funny ones from Significant Other, and you know, the Nookies and all that. It's not really, it's not really deep music, is it? But like, it's fun. You know what I mean? I was at a gig the other night, and this metal band, 16 years old, 3 of them did a cover of Break Stuff, and it was like someone of my generation covering the Beatles, you know. And I was thinking, you're 16. How do you know about how
Mhm.
did you love Limp Bizkit that much? It's because your mum and dad played it to you, isn't it? And but that stuff has lived on. So my point is that that band was so big, and Slipknot got so big cleverly.
Mm.
I just think people were done. And you just said, Matt, that Kill Switch came out. That stuff was great, right? Really, really convincing and new.
Yeah.
It wasn't new, was it? You got to a certain point and everything sounded like either Pantera or Black Album Metallica with a bit of extra
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, as you say, it was new aesthetic, new stuff. Lamb of God were pretty convincing when they came out, weren't they?
Yeah.
And the rest of them. There was a big old thing. The media shifted focus. Your point about downloads and the death of the industry, see, that would affect everyone, not just metal bands, which is
Mhm.
why it's making me think. I mean, you know, you didn't see hip hop bands going away, did you? And people
Yeah.
still bought Disney pop
True.
in billions of units. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think it was an aesthetic thing. I think people got a bit embarrassed. You know, they grew up. They were 25 when they'd been 18 when they first got into it, and they're thinking, I shouldn't really still have Serge Tankian on my wall. You know what I mean? I just think, and it was so vivid. It was so vivid. Look at the 70s, right? When you had all the glitter and the Bowie and the Mark Bolan and the Sweet, and everyone had silver suits, right? Because that's an extreme look. When it falls from fashion, it falls fucking quickly from fashion, right? And I think you can apply that analogy to new metal as well. Anything that's that glittering and bright and vivid, it's not built to endure. It's just
Mhm.
not. It's too extreme, right? And people just thought, you know what, this isn't serious anymore. The big bands are still good. There's a lot of shit bands as well that are just copying this that record companies have put together.
Mhm.
Add all that up, and you are right about the death of the industry because of the downloads. Nah,
You
it
got to think.
burned brightly and briefly. That's
I
a
don't
nice
know
way
as
of putting it.
well. We obviously we're touching on new metal. A lot of the lyrics were a lot deeper and emotional. Obviously, after new metal, then came like the post-hardcore and the screamo and the emo, which the next generation of kids who were perhaps in school, they was perhaps getting into rock music through Limp Bizkit and Korn, but they wanted their own bands as well. They wanted something especially for them, and of course, it was something that attracted that generation up, and then we got the My
In,
Chemical Romances and all those.
right.
It could
And
have
then
been.
that is an absolutely sharp dividing line. That is where a lot of people just stop listening, right? They got it. They listened to thrash metal in the 80s and new metal in the 90s, and then they were just done because they were like 35. You know what I mean? And so then it was returned to a young person's form of music again, I think.
Yeah.
Which is why at that point you had this whole rise of classic metal, right? The term classic rock hadn't really existed before about 2002, before the mag came out. And suddenly you had older people who had some money and could afford to spend 80 quid to go and see Iron Maiden or whatever, and then but didn't want to hear anything else, really. You know, they could dig Limp Bizkit fine, and then beyond that they were done. And I honestly think it's when the new wave of American heavy metal came in, and the emo and the screamo and the metalcore, that was when that happened. I think there's a really sharp dividing line there.
It's because there's also like the idea of, I keep trying to link these to like perfect storms of things as well. Like, remember I was talking about Ozfest and just Woodstock and all that stuff. At the same time, Wes has left. Slipknot were on a hiatus and doing side projects. And Korn, presumably, maybe Jonathan wasn't quite as angsty, or the angst was being replaced by all this stuff. There's all sorts of reasons why you turn
Angst
your
replaced
attention.
by affluence.
Yeah. So give me like the hidden treasures then. Like what was completely missed at the time. Maybe they're still going, Matt. Any sort of bands which you might not have heard of, might not have seen on Kerrang or Scuzz, which might be worth a pop these days, or at least revisiting.
Fucking hell.
Oh, I've got something about Scuzz, which I'll tell you off the record afterwards, Joe.
No, I used to like Scuzz. I filmed a series for them. It was never broadcast.
Okay. I've got so much to tell you. Okay, go on then, Matt. Give us some gems I can note down.
Yeah, just sort of thinking back to that time. I mean, when we did only have perhaps Kerrang, the TV show, and the magazine, we missed out on a hell of a lot of bands who did fairly well in America. So it was only when it came to me doing my books that I was actually able to go back and perhaps find a load of bands that I missed out on the first time that were really good. But I still, in terms of albums from back in the day, I still love them. But the band themselves have always been an absolute train wreck. But a band called Floor, they did an album called Through the Eyes. I think that was just phenomenal. The first gig I think I ever went to was Taproot on their Welcome tour. And the band supporting them was Pulse Ultra.
Wow, that's a great name.
Yeah, they were a little bit different. They had distinctive time signatures. They were a little bit more progressive in places. They only did one album called Headspace. They were signed to Atlantic Records. And yeah, obviously put on the spot here. I can't sort of...
It's okay.
There's obviously, there were so many. A band called Level. They only did one album. I think the guy went on and vocaled for Redeemer for a little while. They was a bit more of a rap rock band. But yeah, cheap plug. But if anybody wants to buy the book online, it's only $4.99 on Amazon at the minute. So there's plenty of bands in there. There we go.
And both are still on and around. Joel, have you got any hidden treasures that are coming to mind?
What's funny, right? What's funny is that I was just looking at Matt then, and it's hard, isn't it, when you're put on the spot?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I'll quickly open up the Word document right of my book because I haven't read it in years. And I've just realised that I put like Clutch in there and stuff, right? It's so inappropriate for a new metal band. And I've just come across Disturbed. How about that? Massive name that we have not mentioned once so far. I never liked them. Did you like them, Matt?
First two albums, nothing after that.
They played on Saturday, download. And I was like,
they're still popular, but you know what you're going to get with them. I'll sort of relate them to Five Finger Death Punch. Every album is pretty much the same.
It's hard to find anyone who says I love Disturbed. You know what I mean?
I was wondering, is this like a UK or USA thing? Are they massive in the USA and then they've just got this weird cult following in the UK, which is why we're like we don't know anyone who loves them.
I think they still do arena tours when they come here, which
really?
I kind of. So in terms of the size of the venues, yeah, I think they still. I mean, they are. I don't know if I've ever.
Let me shout out some names to you blokes. All right, these are going to crack you up. Insane Clown Posse. Like apparently they're massive in the southern states of America.
Right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't pay 10p to see them. Do you know if they're any good?
Literally,
literally
a hip hop duo.
Yeah. Why are they in my book? I suppose they're kind of a little. I don't know. Kid
Rock.
A moment in time. Here. I think I included Kid Rock in this, and I remember now thinking why I did. There's an argument to he's not a new metal band act, is he now? But at the time he had a moment, didn't he? And I wonder whether that was sort of pushed. He was pushed that way.
All right, he's on the playlist. He's on the Spotify playlist for new metal.
What about Kitty? That's not a bad band.
Yeah, I had Fallon interviewed in the book because I wanted to get a female perspective, and do you remember there was an English band called Sugar Coma that were kind of like they were the English version of Kitty?
I do. I remember.
Yeah,
I've put Life of Agony in here. I wonder. I don't know, early emo sort of thing, really, isn't it?
It was the reason you put it in was because the emotive element of the songs, if I remember rightly. Thank
you for reminding me. Right, I've put Marilyn Manson in there as well, which makes zero sense. It made sense at the time, because I was thinking of new in EW, different transformative forces in metal, and he seemed to fit the bill. There's a load of bands that shouldn't be in there. I think I might have even put Queens of the Stone Age in there. It's so stupid. Right, hang on. There's loads of these. Mr. Bungle.
No. Well, they were at Sick New World.
Yeah. See, when we think about new metal now, it seemed so big at the time, like nothing was going to be the same again. I remember very clearly. That was one reason why I did this book. It was like, we got to chronicle this. It might not last for years. Of course it didn't. But there was a lot of bands that all did something vaguely new metal-y in their sound. You know what I mean? All right, my ruin. Nail Bomb, no. Nickelback, I thought Nickelback in there. Am I insane or what? 9 Inch Nails. Oh, 9 Inch Nails. Industrial, really.
Yeah,
rather
same
than
as Fear
new.
Factory.
Yeah. Yeah. Orgy. That was a new metal band.
Yeah.
Why?
Papa Roach. I fucking hated Papa Roach. They were big though, weren't they?
They
Massive.
still do really well. I'm surprised
POD,
at how
remember
well-
them?
Yeah.
Payable on Death. Christian band. Great, it's quite a metal name. I've put Pitch Shifter in there, which doesn't really make any. Oh, Powerman 5000.
They're still
So many
going.
bands that I never want to hear of again. I had to listen to so much stuff. We're getting to the end. Puddle of Mud. No.
I think this is speaking to your waves though, Matt. There was some sort of post grunge bits, which
Mud,
clearly
yeah.
you were tapping into there, Joel. Nickelback, yeah. Now you'd go absolutely fucking not, but at the time they were definitely like there was a post grunge
Yeah.
tone that was catching them.
But it makes
A lot of it
no
was
sense. I put Rammstein there as well. It's literally no sense whatsoever. Seven Dust. There you go. I got one right.
They're an OG. Yeah. I'd sort of, yeah, they're more of a cult band. I think they've got a very healthy fan base, often considered very consistent throughout their career.
Stained. Static X.
Oh,
Static
yeah.
X.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, they had quite a moment,
Yeah.
actually. What do you think of the current version that's touring?
I've seen the live show and I thought they were really good. I mean, I still don't think they've
What I hear.
confirmed Edsel Dopes, the singer, but sounds pretty. He does a good job. I think they've got a second version of the album, the Project Regeneration, out this year, and I think that is the final recordings from Wayne that they'll be using there.
That's it. Millions of small bands that never went anywhere. It's quite a good laugh writing it, I remember.
Right then, chaps, I'm going to bring it to a close there. Are there any closing comments or observations you might have made and then thought, I'll tail that for later or whatever?
Oh, I want Matt to tell me if it's still going and if it has been a resurgence. I don't really know.
I mean, there's still a lot of active bands. As you said, Korn are probably the one that are putting out the most consistent and strong material still, especially since Brian Head Welsh came back, 6 years ago now. I think these last few albums they've done with him involved are fantastic. Limp Bizkit, I'm not aware of the venue, but they're playing a big gig in London in August.
Oh yeah. Yeah, might go and see him actually.
I've read it's like a 60,000 capacity. I don't know whether they're going to sell it out. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of the bands putting out songs, if not full albums. I think you'd be a bit naive to think it's ever going to be the same as it was, but it's like there for the nostalgia and then
there's not loads of new bands coming out, are they? Forming with a DJ and massive baggy strides, are there? That's not happening.
In America, in my book, I've done a little back section called the New Blood. There is a lot of bands that, like I say, using that and similar aesthetics. There is a few of the Adidas wearers and all that involved as well. Electronics do seem to be a common incorporation into the sound these days as well. But there is
you can make it on a bit of free software. That's why.
Yeah, true. But there is a few bands there you can instantly, I can see that they're influenced by Korn perhaps or Limp Bizkit. But yeah, it was for me especially, obviously it sort of helped me grow and the music was sort of important to me. So I still do have fond memories. And yes, there was a few bands that didn't stand the test of time, but
just a few.
Yeah.
Fair enough, then, lads.
Good.